Welcome to another episode of Unscripted with Marilyn Morales. Today's episode comes to you from the Gathering Haven. As those of you that know me know, this is a new venture where we bring holistic practitioners together with those that are seeking wellness on many levels. Well, my next guest is a council member of the Gathering Haven, and we're getting together today to discuss who makes Dr. Sid Dr. Sid. Let me read his bio. Dr. Sid Cohen is a clinical psychologist in a private practice for over 40 years in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. His practice is primarily psychotherapy for individuals and couples, with clients ranging in the ages of 18 through senior years. Specialty areas of treatment. These speak to my heart. PTSD, anxiety disorders, depression, complicated grief, and relationship problems and challenges. And who isn't going through something like this these days, especially after the years of COVID that we just had? He also offers psychologically oriented, individually based life coaching program called Focus Topic Coaching. Finally, very importantly though, he has a published book available on Amazon and Kindle entitled Your Self-Sabotaging Inner Bully. And I'm looking to get into that. Let's welcome Dr. Cohen to the show.
Hi, Marilyn.
Hello.
Hi, nice to be here.
Thank you for coming on the show. I've been looking to interview you for a while and dig into what makes Dr. Sidney Cohen, Dr. Sidney Cohen. So before we talk about who you are today, can you share with me a little bit about the younger Sidney and what was your life like and what led you to psychology as a career?
You know, it's a very interesting question, and I'll tell you why. Actually, in college at the State University of New York at Stony Brook, where I was as an undergrad, I was an engineering major. And what happened was, long story short, in the middle of my sophomore year, I developed a mindfulness that engineering was definitely not right for me. I really didn't enjoy it very much. I didn't feel very confident about advanced mathematics and engineering theory and so forth. So I'd like to come up with something a little more inspirational for how I actually entered the field. But one day, one of my roommates came back to the room and said, you know, psychology is a very interesting area. And I had never given it any thought. And so next semester, second semester, sophomore year, I took some psychology classes. And then I knew that was my calling. And I knew engineering was never going to be my calling. And from then on, it was just a matter of the combination of, I found it absolutely fascinating. And I had my own set of personal issues I won't hesitate to acknowledge. Put those two things together, and that's where I got started.
Well, that's exactly where I was going to go with my next question, and you answered it, right? Did you find that it helped you personally as you were going through your courses? I'm like, wait a minute, that's me. I can see myself in that. Or did you know that you had your own personal issues before even going into psychology classes?
It's a good question. I think it was more that I really came to realize by studying. I knew that there were some things, but what I think made the difference is by extensively studying and intensively studying psychology, you're also then reading up a lot on things that bring up and bring out what it is that you may not have really wanted to face or may have been trying to lock away kind of in a compartment. So just as one example, I was reading probably later in junior year, a whole section of a book on anxiety and panic disorder. And I really did not want to see until I was doing this reading that I had had challenges with anxiety. I had moments where I had had panic attacks. So it really forced me, and I mean that in the best meaning, it forced me to really take a look, go within myself and recognize, hey, here's some stuff I do have that I do need to address. So I just felt like I was now being really honest with myself.
So the authenticity comes out, right?
Authenticity is the word for it.
That's it. You're an authentic self. And so you enjoy doing this. And actually, were you curious about other people, right? And what made them tick? So that brought out that curiosity in you as well, it sounds like.
Yeah. That's spot on. It really was twofold then. It was gaining more insight into myself and really, again, being more authentic and facing some things I needed to face. But I also found that what was also really stirring up inside of me, in the best possible meaning of stirring up inside of me, is a desire to work with other people, to help them take a look at themselves, to recognize there were ways I had my own emotional pain, and to feel as much compassion as I could to help people deal with theirs.
Yeah, I think a lot of us that have gone through personal challenges, right? We find our purpose through our own difficult road. And that's what makes everything worthwhile at the end of the day, right? Is that we're doing something that we love to do. We can help people with it and we understand it from a different perspective because we've gone through it, right? So, you deal with PTSD. And one of the things that I talk about a lot is PTSD because when I was going through it, I had no idea that it was that. PTSD for me was always somebody in the military, right? Somebody going through something severely traumatic. And when I experienced it after my 9/11
Mm-hmm.
situation, where I was a public health nurse in New York City and I witnessed everything, the symptoms that developed, the physical manifestation of that, I didn't know what was wrong with me. I didn't give it that label. I didn't know that that was that. I just knew I couldn't sleep, that I kept seeing everything that I saw that day repetitively in my dreams
Mm-hmm.
while I was awake, that noises would trigger me, that, a loud bang, just like I heard that day, would bring me right back to it. And it wasn't until somebody else told me, you need help because you keep having these fears and these things come up and you're not well. And it's because of this. And when I saw a doctor, he was like, yeah, you have PTSD. It's not just for the military. It's for people that have gone through anything traumatic and are having trouble going through that. Right. So have you seen an increase in these symptoms? And I would think it's yes, but I want to hear from you in a clinical perspective since COVID supposedly has gone away.
The answer is a resounding yes, Marilyn. And there's, I think, two pieces to that. First of all, no question that what became traumatic for a lot of people, as I suspect you realize, was loneliness. There
Yes.
were a lot of people feeling very isolated. So even if there might be phone contact, email contact, or whatever, the lack of personal contact face to face definitely took a pretty significant emotional toll on a lot of people. So that was one factor. But what was also a factor is as more and more people were experiencing that kind of loneliness, and also there were a lot of people experiencing extra relationship issues as well. So there were problems that may have already pre-existed in relationships that were being exacerbated either by the isolation or, sort of ironically, in other cases where people were already living together, married, unmarried, whatever. Having to spend so much time together was actually kind of paradoxically backfiring. So putting all those factors together, but there was one other factor too. I believe that what really was as much a factor as any is that people, by virtue of having to be virtual more online and really having that as an outlet and a way of communicating, were talking a lot more about how traumatized they were feeling. So more and more people, by communicating that way in a broad sense online, were getting to see that they were in a lot of company, that this wasn't something unusual, unique. It certainly wasn't something that was in any way a downside. It's a reality that more and more people were sharing it with each other and really heightening each other's consciousness. This is pretty pervasive.
Yeah. I think there's always a silver lining, right? To a negative situation. And I think the um, bringing to the forefront the issues that you were having already and just putting it on a back burner, it forced you to face them, deal with them to be able to move forward. There
And,
was,
and if I can just quickly add, and
yes,
it was sort of normalized. If so many people were acknowledging they were feeling this way, then it reduced any kind of sense of it being stigmatizing. And I think that
yes.
also helped.
Yeah, there's a huge freedom that comes with that.
Yes.
And a lot of help that wasn't available before has become available because of it, right? Strategies, everyday strategies that people can implement. Healthcare workers dealt with a lot of that because while everybody was home, right? we were sent to battle. We were sent into war, and we had to face that every single day. And the knowing that this day could be the day that I catch this thing and potentially pass from it or bring it back to my family was a very real fear, right? Many people left the medical profession. Nurses that were there for many years left because of it. But I also think that it was something that we needed to talk about. And afterwards, there were tools that were then, because of this, now implemented into the healthcare realm, that they were teaching nurses and practitioners tips and tools on how to get through your day, which was very needed before that.
Mm-hmm.
So that is good positive. What do you think about that?
Well, let me just add this to the mix that it just strikes me. I want to make sure to add to the mix. I've been in practice, as you said, over 4 decades. I can tell you, Marilyn, without any hesitation, in these last approximately, say, about 4 years now, give or take, I know not only for myself, but on behalf of a whole lot of my mental health colleagues, we have never been busier. It continues to be the case, as much as COVID has basically subsided to enough of a degree anyway as a major daily concern. But the phones don't stop ringing over and over again. I know how many of my colleagues and myself will hear, Dr. Cohen, I've called different people. Nobody seems to be taking on new patients, or everyone's practice is filled. It just doesn't stop.
Yes. And there's good and bad to that, right? It's
Two-sided.
sad that there's so many of us that are out there that are suffering and need the help. And there's
Yeah.
not enough of you guys out there to help.
Yeah. And trauma, as you brought up, is as much the issue as any. And as you also were alluding to, there are different kinds of trauma. You're alluding to war as obviously one example. Natural disasters is an example.
That's right.
Let me just mention one other type of trauma. It is something that I do a lot of work with people on, and it's not something that a lot of people necessarily connect with being an example of trauma, and that's betrayal. One of the things that I do a lot of work with people about is feeling betrayed, and how, taken to the extreme, if as a result of being betrayed, particularly in an important personal relationship, although that's not the only context, of course, you can feel betrayal. But if you feel betrayed by someone important to you, it can create very real clinical symptoms if it's not addressed and dealt with. So the term I use is, and I'm not the only person who uses the term, is betrayal trauma, putting the two words together. For some people, in the face of being betrayed, particularly if the betrayal was a blindsiding, if you are blindsided by somebody and it's a betrayal, whether it's an infidelity, whether it's discovering a pattern of lying, whatever it is, if you don't address it, it isn't just going to trigger a lot of anger and a lot of hurt. Those are kind of givens. But it can lead to clinical symptoms of depression and anxiety and be its own form of trauma.
Wow. Didn't look at it that way. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that. Did we see an increase in people with this type of symptom of betrayal? Or did we see an increase in this in the last couple of years?
Yeah, it's the same kind of thing. I'm going to attribute this as a positive to what gets put on social media. What I do is on Instagram and on Facebook, I will post psychological articles, psychological posts. And one of the things I've learned from doing it, not just that I'm trying to share knowledge, it's what I've also learned. And I consider myself really fortunate to have learned by reading other people's posts, other people's pages. There are people who already, before I was doing this, were specializing in the subject of betrayal trauma, with tons of thousands of followers sharing their experiences. That is what heightened my awareness to this. It was already there, but as a result of a lot more coverage and a lot more sharing of these experiences, it just became more obvious to me this is a more widespread issue than I realized.
Wow. Wow. That's very eye-opening. And definitely, for those of you that are in the Gathering Haven, you have access to Dr. Sidney Cohen and some of his teachings as well. So we'll be including him more so that we can share this, because I think this is a very good topic, a very good topic. I know several people who are going through And I wouldn't have called it betrayal trauma, but yes, have been betrayed and have physical manifestations that are lasting a very long time, and they can't seem to move forward. So I appreciate you bringing that to the forefront, for sure.
Great. And I just want to piggyback off the last thing you said. I'm glad you brought up the physical somatic piece, because related to, and even in addition to, anxiety and depression, there most certainly can be somatic impact on the body, whether it's headaches, whether it's GI issues, blood pressure, appetite, sleep issues, all the above can be exactly what you're alluding to, somatic manifestations.
Yeah, usually that is what's bringing somebody to seek help, is the physical symptoms that they're feeling. And I don't know why I feel this way, but when you start talking to them, you see that there's all this other stuff attached to it. Now, tell me, I have a question. Is there anything when you're dealing with people that are dealing with this type of trauma or any type of trauma, is there anything that they can start doing today to assist with the way that they're feeling? Is there any quick tip that you can give us?
Yeah. Make sure, no matter what you do, that your priority is healing. You need to heal. And part of the healing needs to be to make sure what I call your inner bully or inner critic, another term for it, doesn't steer you into blaming yourself, criticizing yourself, making you feel as though there's something you've done wrong, as though stretching it. But I've seen this with enough people I've worked with. There are some people who actually find that they're blaming themselves as though they deserved to be betrayed, that the focus becomes internalizing of that trauma rather than externalizing it. And by externalizing it, I don't mean you have to, really let loose at the person who betrayed you, but to recognize something was done wrong to you. There is never, ever any excuse whatsoever for somebody betraying you. And it's really important as part of the healing to keep that in perspective. And then what you mainly is going to need to do is anything and everything under the heading of self-care. What you're going to do to take care of yourself, seek out professional help if the line has been crossed into it being outright traumatizing. Self-care and healing, they need to be a priority.
Beautiful. Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Thank you for that. And everybody's tool in the toolbox, we talk about that a lot, right, is going to be different. For myself, one of the big things that helped with healing was aromatherapy, because it's always spoken to me. So different scents will take me into a different state of being. I liken it to when you walk into a bakery and smell chocolate chip cookies or something good like that. It immediately transforms your state of happiness, right?
Yeah.
You get happy. That's aromatherapy. It triggers positive memories. And that's where you want to go.
And I think what's great about that is, you've learned, yourself well enough to know, Marilyn, that's what resonates for you. What each person needs to be clear about is what modality resonates for them.
Right. And you need more than one. So that's just one of the ones that speak to me, right? Walking in nature, meditation. There's so many that we can learn for self-care. And self-care is so important. So now you segued right into your book. Right? So you wrote a book called Your Self-Sabotaging Inner Bully. When did you write this book?
My best of my recollections, about 12, 13 years ago now. It's been a while.
So even back then you were talking about this. So this was at the forefront of your practice even back then, right? That you said, I need to write a book about this.
The self-sabotage piece, yes, that's been a part of my work for a long time. Betrayal trauma is more in the last few years, but the whole subject of inner bullying and self-sabotage, that's been there for a while, yes.
The inner bully. Yeah, there's a saying that says the enemy is the inner me, right? And that's the bigger one.
Yeah, there's really part of what I always emphasize to people I work with, or if I'm giving talks, the term inner bully is the term that I use. There are, however, terms that can, different strokes for different folks, resonate differently. Like I mentioned a few minutes ago, inner critic or dark side, shadow, ego. When I'm working with somebody who's struggling with self-sabotage, I will not necessarily only use the term inner bully. If it resonates, we use it. And it's very important. If somebody says to me, that term doesn't quite work for me, then I will ask the person, so what term resonates for you? And whatever term they come up with, that's the term we work with. But the basic idea in a nutshell is we all have a part of our subconscious that I believe is a force, and I use that as a metaphor, of course, a force within us that we learn early on can steer us to self-sabotage. It could be in relationships, it could be on the job, getting us to do things that can hurt us in a relationship or job situation. And the source of this and the framework I come from is this notion of an inner bully. And we've all got to be very mindful that that inner bully is in there, kind of waiting for its opportunity to mess with us.
That's right. And we got to beat it back down into submission. Love it. I absolutely love everything that you've discussed here today. And I want to thank you for coming on to the show. And I have one last question for you. And I ask this of all my guests. And that is because in every decade of our lives, the definition of success will change for us based on our experiences, right? So what we thought was success 10 years ago is very different depending on the decade of life that you're in. So can you share with me, what is your definition of success?
Okay. So the number one thing that jumps out at me about success is hard work. Working hard at whatever context of your life, where you put your heart, your soul, your passion, your energy into whatever it is you're doing, whether it's on the job, whether it's in your personal relationships, whether it's in projects that you're working on. That for me is the number one criteria. I don't care how much money you earn, what kind of job you have, where you live, how many people you have in your family. All of those variables are part of what I think it's safe to say, stereotypically at least, are what most people consider to be aspects of success. It's not to say I don't respect those aspects of success. I do. But in the end, there are people in this world who aren't well off financially at all, who have a lot of struggles in their life. And yet, if they continue to work, they stay persistent, and they stay courageous. I'm really big on courage. If somebody is working hard and as courageous as they can, that's success to me as much as any.
Beautiful response. Thank you for that. It's the first time I've heard that response. Love it. Thank you again, Dr. Cohen, for coming on the show and for letting us delve into your life. And anyone that wants to learn more about The Gathering Haven, send us an email at info@thegatheringhaven.com. And for my viewers, I will see you next time.